Blog Talk Radio.
And welcome to another edition of Carnivore Radio. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman, along with the esteemed Dr. Eric Lopkin. And, we've been together for a while. First started with terrestrial radio, Dr. Lopkin. And I don't know if you remember, you probably do, when we used to do once a year, we used to do the greatest guitarists. Remember that?
Yes, I do.
And I have a funny story, I have to say this, that I think you were there when, we took callers, and I got a call, and it's like, Mr. Smith would like to talk to you. And, we got callers commenting on, who was the best guitarist, what they thought of that, guitar solo, so on and so forth. And I remember, I thought, oh, wow, it's, some rich guy or some famous person calling in, because we've had that from time to time. And the guy was calling from a rehab center. And it was like his last call. I'll never forget that. I swear to God. I thought you were there. And he's like, yeah, I really like that, whatever guitar solo. I think it might have actually been the birthday boy, Keith Richards. But yeah, it was like, Mr. Smith would like to talk to you now. I go, sure. And it's like, yeah, man, this is awesome. So it is Mr. Richards. It was a classic. It is Mr. Richards, 77. And I think actually, in some ways, an underrated guitarist. And I've seen the Stones, and we went to the same concert, not together. What was it, like 89 in Shea Stadium? And the whole place, the whole upper row was like going up it. Remember that, Dr.
The Steel Wheel Store, yes.
How wild is that? We went to the same concert, didn't even know you. And I don't know about you, but like Richards was off the hook that night.
Oh, absolutely. I honestly believe that was where they were near their peak.
Oh,
I mean, they had their act together. I mean, they hadn't gotten old enough yet to start going downhill.
You nailed it once again, Dr. Lopkin. Yes, and the other thing is Keith was somewhat clean. For you and I, we'd say, like, God, you got to go somewhere. I mean, but for him, it was pretty clean. Jesus. And he also had this solo gig, which I saw him I saw them like 3 times. It was the Keith Richards show, and he was. I saw them in Atlantic City for like the last night of the concert. Oh my! I tell friends this, and people. I was like, well, Clapton was one of the guests. Keith Richards, I'll never forget this. Talk about like a John Wayne moment. Spits out his cigarette and destroyed Clapton. And people are like, oh yeah, come on, I saw it. No, I saw it. Clapton's just like slowly walking back, playing all the technical stuff. Richards with like the power chords was just crushing him. It was awesome. But,
people do not realize that it was always the Keith Richards show. I mean, it was Keith Richards bands. If you're familiar with Craig Ferguson, who used to host the Late Late Show on PBS.
He was awesome, yes.
He was working on a movie with Mick Jagger and toured with the Stones for a while to get the feel. And he talks about this when he comes to realize, because he always thought, the Rolling Stones is Mick Jagger's band. And touring with them, he realized that Mick Jagger was the lead singer in Keith Richards' band. And Keith was the one that controlled that band.
There is no question, without any doubt. And in fact, when they did their solo acts, when they, hated each other, still, I don't know how much they like each other now, but they despised each other. Keith Richards had like a really good album and a great tour. Mick Jagger it was something like a Saturday Night Live skit. It was awful. I mean, trying to be like 25 again, and it was just brutal. And Keith like nailed it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the other thing is, it was the Keith Richards band, because when he was on, I think the Stones were, them and the Who they were the two best live acts ever. But half the time, because let's say I've seen the Stones like 10 times, believe it or not, half the time I've seen him, Keith Richards was not, the number you've reached is not in service at this time, and the band sucked. No, I mean, the band was like, whatever, it was not good. And the last story was like, I remember I rented with a friend, it was like a pay-per-view, and I think it was 1994, and it was, whatever. So the Keith Richards and whatever, the band, okay? But before then, they had an MTV special, and they had a guy from Living Colour, that band, which is really awesome, by the way. And he went around, to each one of their dressing rooms. And they had, like, Charlie Watts, and he's like, yeah, how you doing? I'm doing great, And then they went to Bill Wyman, or the new guy, I forgot his name, whatever, doesn't make a difference, Daryl something, the bass player, and he's hanging out with his wife or girlfriend, just, hanging out. And then they descended into and then they went to Mick, and he's just picking out what he's going to wear, whatever. And then they descended. It was actually, I swear, it was a little, scary. They went to Keith Richards and Ron Wood. They were hanging out together. There's, smoke everywhere. And you'd have to have a physician's desk reference to identify the drugs they were on. It was like, whoa, dude. I went to college. I get it, right? But, whoa. I mean, it was like, it wasn't like, hey, having a couple, smoking a couple of joints. It was like Keith Richards was looking at the camera like it was like the sun or the solar eclipse or something. And then, so they had this big pay-per-view special. I don't know what it cost back then, $20, $30, whatever it was. And he couldn't play a note. And then the final thing, you talk about, they were in the top of the game in '89, which I do agree with you 100% on. So this is funny. I wish I recorded it and put it on YouTube. So I'm hanging out in my place, and I think I'm maybe doing the dishes. So in the background I have a recent video. It was a movie of the Stones called Havana Nights or something like that, about them playing Cuba. Mm-hmm. And so Keith has this song, or they have a song called Out of Control, and it's a really great Keith Richards jam when he could play. I kid you not. He's playing because he's got arthritis. He's got all this other. He's got 1,000 things wrong with him. He's playing this guitar solo that, seriously, I've never played guitar in my life. I think I could probably do it. It was awful. And it's like, meow, meow. My cat is on my sofa howling back at the TV thinking it was another cat. If I had that on YouTube, I'd have 5 million hits. I swear to God, I went from the kitchen to the living room, and I'm just looking, and I go, I can't believe I'm watching this. The cat's going, rah, rah, like you're thinking that it was another cat. So, your final thoughts on Mr. Richards?
Yeah, I mean, I wish him a happy birthday. For most of us, it's amazing that he's made it this far. But, he's an amazing guitar player. He's an amazing musician. Again, not at the top of his game anymore, and it's a shame.
No,
but
zero.
When he was on, there was nobody better.
We'll end at that. I agree 100. I don't, and it's more than technically, Ron Wood could be a better guitar player than Keith. Technically, he knows all the chords, but he's boring. He doesn't. Keith Richards, when he's on, when we saw him at Shea Stadium, he can send you to another place when he's on, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
So let's switch gears to a more serious note. We're not talking about astronomy. We are talking about solar winds, and you may want to comment on that, Dr. Lopkin.
Yeah, let's bring our audience up to speed in case you don't know what SolarWinds is. SolarWinds is a cybersecurity firm, and they have contracts with the federal government as well as many Fortune 500 companies. And it turns out that the cybersecurity firm was hacked, and their software, when it updated the federal systems, the corporate systems, it allowed Russian hackers to get into these systems and steal data. And apparently this was going on for quite a while before anybody caught on. So this may very well be the largest hack of all time. It's been tracked back to Russia, so there's no doubt that it's Russian hackers behind this. And while the federal government was so worried about a cyber attack on the elections, Russia attacked every other system and ignored the election system.
Well, I mean, I'm not so sure that wasn't an opportunity for them. They knew that we were transfixed on the election, and they play the long game.
Absolutely. This had apparently been going on for quite a while, and part of the problem was our federal government has been focused on the very obvious threats. They were focused on Huawei, which is a Chinese technology firm in telecommunications. There was a massive vulnerability if you used Huawei circuits. So we were focused on that. We were focused on TikTok, which collected all sorts of data, and as a Chinese company, the Chinese government has access to all of that data. We were looking at the low-hanging fruit, and we completely missed the fastball that came right at our heads.
You know something, Dr. Lopkin? I believe that Trump will have some lasting legacies, but in my little pea brain, his biggest impact and legacy is he exposed the swamp, the entrenched state for what they are, incompetent. Your comments? I mean, through these deals with Iran, you know, all the geniuses that went to, you know, Georgetown and blah, 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 it turned out to be, when you look behind the curtain, we're just incompetent. And isn't this one more example of that?
Well, I mean, we've said for a long time, the best and the brightest don't work for the government. But
it's more, no, it's not.
More of a
Lopkin, Dr. Lopkin, you're 1,000% correct. But I think, before you go on, I think it's become, it's been exasperated. I think it's worse now. In the 50s, I think you can, you know, whatever, I wasn't there, but I mean, you had some of the, we look at the book, The Best and the Brightest. Yeah, they sent us down to Vietnam, but they were really smart people. I think it's getting worse. I think people who are, I think maybe your lowest hanging, like your Larsons of the world, for those of you who aren't from Connecticut, he's our esteemed 1st District congressperson, they're going into politics. So I'll let you run with that. I think it's getting worse.
It's definitely getting worse, but in terms of cybersecurity, it's even more devastating than it is elsewhere in the government. Because the best and the brightest in cybersecurity are hackers. And these are guys that are never going to get the security clearance to work for the government. So by definition, we're sort of left with, at best, second-tier defense. Now, SolarWinds is not part of the government. This is a private company, and they're the ones that got hacked. So, you know, we're talking about the government not catching it. The bigger problem isn't that, you know, we're getting incompetent people in the government. The problem is that the folks in government are outsourcing basically everything with no understanding of what it is they're outsourcing. So
yeah, but isn't that one and the same? Isn't that kind of one and the same? I mean, there's no umbrella. There's nothing there. We're defenseless, either if it's a direct assault on U.S. national cybersecurity or private interests. Look, if you looked at the Chinese, they have a stealth fighter, and wouldn't you know that it's almost an exact copy of the F-22? Oh, gee, I wonder how that happened. I mean, this has been going on for years.
It has been, and we'll talk more about that right after this message. We'll be right back.
To reach the next level, you need to operate at peak performance. The key to this is mastering the 7 elements of success. Learn how to master mindset, focus, operations, communications, innovation, evaluation metrics, and continuous improvement. Get the Biznetics Way at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, and bookstores near you.
And we're back. And remember, if you want to be part of the conversation, you can call us at 563-999-3693. That's 563-999-3693. We were talking about the massive cybersecurity hack. And one of the anchors on CNBC's Squawk Alley actually put it best. He was talking about the fact that we were going after Huawei, we were going after TikTok because we're going after individual threats. And what we should have been doing is putting in place an overall policy to protect ourselves. Now, I mean, this is not your standard hack either. This is not somebody going into a computer system, getting the data and taking it out. This hack actually it gave Russia access to our power grid, to our actual infrastructure systems. So
well, that is obviously chilling because our power grid is already obsolete, probably obviously always been vulnerable to hacking. But is it just to switch gears just for a little bit, we had such a moment of optimism in 1990-91 about the Cold War is over. Is that not over? That is the end of the Cold War. Hurry back.
That's most assuredly over. The Cold War is back. The Cold War has been back since Putin took over, because Putin was a former KGB agent. He was a communist hardliner. He never wanted the Cold War to end. He was in the minority.
But I'll throw something else out there that, yes, he was always going to be a nationalist. But I really believe that with the end of the Cold War, we poked Russia in the eye. In other words, they dismantled the Warsaw Pact. We expanded NATO. I mean, John McCain always, instigating something, God rest his soul. I mean, I really believe we didn't help. And also when they were on their knees, we could have done more to help them. They went with the program and we left them hanging to dry. And that's my opinion, at least. Not that Putin was going to be a Cub Scout. I'm not saying that. But I think we exasperated, and I think it's not so far from the military-industrial complex. Could not live without a Cold War of some kind.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, Putin went beyond nationalism. Nationalism for Russia would have been Russia doing what was best for Russia within its borders. But Putin stated point blank that he wanted to reassemble the Soviet Union and take over the areas that had escaped them. So this was more than just nationalism. As for us not helping them, I hate to say it, but that's the American way. We helped the Taliban get rid of Russia. We helped the Mujahideen, and then we ignored them, and they came back and blew up the Trade Center. We got Russia down on their knees, and we did nothing for them. This is the American way. We go in, we win a war, cold or hot, and then we go, all right, now you're on your own. And then
we did that even with Pakistan when we needed that against Russia, against Afghanistan. Oh, we warmed up to them and we left them hanging in the lurch.
Right.
And They're a failed
American
nation
flag.
state. You know, no one talks about.
Oh, they are.
You know, one of the big things that kept Obama up at night was, besides concerts in the White House, was a nuclear pact. I mean, they're not exactly like an intact state. It's a little dangerous, to say the least.
It's more than a little dangerous. I mean, one of the biggest national security threats we have is a terrorist group getting nukes from Pakistan.
True. Surprising it hasn't even happened by now. So yes, we do agree that incompetency, even just by natural progression, the best and the brightest going to private entities, going to Wall Street, going to consulting companies. We don't have a real policy, and I really get a little nervous about Biden, that his idea of computer is a spare UNIVAC. Are we even headed for bigger trouble? And, you know, hasn't exactly been, you know, at the forefront of national policy. So we'll see what happens there. But shifting gears, we had a great podcast, and I give you the credits for that, on Wednesday. And you were talking about the Apple, Google, Facebook situation. I found that fascinating, and I wonder if it's not just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, it's definitely the tip of the iceberg, because Facebook escalated the fight this week by taking out full-page ads accusing Apple of antitrust behavior. For those of you not familiar with the situation, Apple has a new feature that they're rolling out in their iPhone and iPad operating systems that forces anybody that uses consumer data to allow the user to opt out. Now, and they said at a conference earlier this week, if Facebook and Google refuse to comply with this, they will remove their apps from the App Store. Now, again, the feature allows people to opt out. It doesn't block the data if the end user wants to have ads targeted to them. Facebook has gone nuts because they're being attacked for antitrust. The DOJ in 40, I believe, states have all filed suit against Facebook for anti-competitive practices. And now Facebook is trying to point the finger at Apple, where Apple has always tried to protect their customers' privacy. And that's what they're doing again by giving them the option to opt out of this tracking.
Yes, and referencing the podcast from Wednesday, and you know, this is what you do day in and day out in terms of helping companies with their technology, their social media. Doesn't this strip away Facebook's revenue model? I mean, that's what they depend on.
That's what they're afraid of, is that it's going to cripple their revenue model. Their big thing is that you can target ads based on all this data. Now, here's where the Facebook argument falls apart. If people opt out now, it doesn't delete all of the data that Facebook has collected over the past years. So they still have the data to target, they just can't collect new data. There's also other ways to target ads based on what someone is doing in Facebook. They can see what groups you're going to or what posts you're liking and can target ads based on the content of those posts. That wouldn't be blocked by all of this. The reason Facebook is doing this is because of the antitrust case. Basically, what they're trying to show is that, look, if Apple does this, we're going to be crippled. Therefore, Apple is a powerful competitor of ours, and we don't have a monopoly. Now, a couple of senators have come forward and already said, they're not buying that argument. The fact of the matter is, the argument doesn't hold water. Apple isn't a competitor of Facebook. It's basically like a business saying, well, our business is based on the fact that we have electricity in our offices. And if the electricity goes out, we can't function. Therefore, the power company is our competitor.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think it just and your articulation of the other possible sources of revenue is spot on. But I think it eliminates some of the low hanging fruit of Facebook. Big implications. Now, we don't have that much time left, and we're not doing a live podcast till next year. I know you're really sad, like all of us, Dr. Lopkin, that 2020 is drawing to a close, aren't you?
Oh, yeah, I'm heartbroken. 2020, as a podcaster and as a journalist, 2020 was a mixed bag, and it reminds me, I can't remember the comedian's name, but he made a statement one day. He said, presidential elections always leave me conflicted because I go into the voting booth and there's one guy who's good for the country and there's one guy who's good for my job.
I love that.
And that's basically what we had. I mean, this was a year I wouldn't wish on anybody, but Lord knows it gave us a lot to talk about.
There is no shortage of material. There will be no shortage of material. 2020, hasta luego, as far as I'm saying. That was not a fun year for Mr. Sherman and others, so I'm not alone. Misery does love company. It was a great year for the beginning of the Carnivore Bites podcast, though, wasn't it, Dr. Lopkin? We've gotten some traction over the year.
We have, again, Lord knows there was no shortage of things to talk about, and we had some great people on to talk about them with. We had, experts in small business, in feeding America, the hunger problem, technology.
We had some noteworthy psychologists in the time of, in the middle of the lockdown and how to deal with this. We had personal coaches talking about not letting go of your goals at a time where everything is disrupted. So overall, I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to next year.
Absolutely. I think 2021 is going to be fantastic as we wrap up the problems from 2020. They're not going to end overnight, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So stay positive about 2021 and look forward to the new year.
Fantastic. Always a pleasure working with you, Dr. Lopkin. We've been together more than most marriages last, that?
I think we're about 10 years or so.
Exactly. Well, yeah. Dr. Lopkin, you have a great holiday season and a great new year, as well as for our listeners as well.
Yes, we wish everybody a happy holidays, a happy new year. We look forward to seeing you in 2021. And remember, you can always catch the replay of the live podcast as well as the Carnivore Bites podcast at xvadio.com/podcasts. You can also catch us at iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts. And now if you go to xvadio.com/subscribe, you can have the podcasts show up in your inbox every week.
As it should. And we are doing the podcast for next Wednesday. That will be available in the archives, won't it, Dr. Lopkin?
It will. You'll be able to hear the last Carnivore Bites podcast of the year next Wednesday. So we will see you then. Have a wonderful holiday and a great new year.
Thank you, Dr. Lopkin. Thanks for our listeners. Take care.